Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Clench your jaw, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, where the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drift by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoyed these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds, gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. The scent of tanned hide mingled with the smoky aroma of burning cedar, dancing through the vaulted workshop like a spirit from the past. In the heart of Istanbul's bustling saddle-makers' quarter, known locally as Sarian, the hammering of mallets, the slicing of knives, and the murmur of ancient prayers created a rhythm of labor both sacred and skilled. It was in this harmony of craft and history that 13-year-old Lau had begun to learn the art of harness making, a decade as old as the empire itself. Hala was the grandson of Uste David, a revered Sarek master saddler, whose works had graced the steeds of sultans and pachas alike. With hands worn but steady, and a beard flecked with gray, David Bey was the keeper of secrets passed down since the days of Mehmet the Conqueror. Each rein, stirrup, and buckle carried not just utility, but artistry and pride. Halil arrived every morning just before Vikari Kazib, the false dawn, sweeping the dust from the cobblestones and kindling the small brazier. He would polish the iron tools, prepare the boiled leather, and gently touch the ornate yokes and breastplates hanging like relics on the walls. His fingers traced the golden threadwork, the embossed motifs of tulips and crescents, each stitch as deliberate as calligraphy. One morning, as a call to prayer floated gently from the nearby Fatih Mosque, David gestured Halal over with a grunt. Laid before him on the low workbench was a raw, thick strip of camel hide. "Today," David said, narrowing his eyes, "you will cut your first rein." Halal's heart jumped. He bowed respectfully and knelt beside the old master. "Which pattern?" "Effendi, the kind made for a prince's parade steed. Strength and beauty together. Measure twice, cut once." The weight of the moment settled into Halal's chest. With a bone ruler and sharp blade, he drew careful lines, then pressed a knife along the grain. The leather resisted at first, but he leaned with purpose, letting the scent of the hide and the weight of history guide his hand. When he finished, David examined it, silent, a little crooked at the end. He muttered, "But the beginning is noble." That was the closest thing to praise Halal had ever received. The Ottoman harness was no mere tool. It was a mark of civilization, an adornment for the empire's greatest beasts. Horses in the Sultan's stables were clad in full ceremonial tack, glinting with silver, their reins braided with silk thread and horsehair dyed in deep reds and indigos. In war, a harness had to survive the clash of sabers and arrows. In parades, it had to impress ambassadors and all subjects. For centuries, Sarks had been entrusted with this sacred duty, combining leatherworking, metallurgy, and embroidery in one dignified craft. Galal often marveled at how each piece bore the signature of the empire's tastes: arabesque patterns, floral designs, and Quranic verses were carved into bridles as though into marble. One afternoon, as a heavy rain poured outside, David brought out a bundle wrapped in green silk. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a harness so beautiful it took Halal's breath away. Gold leaf glinted along the brow band, and in the center was an inset of lapis lazuli, shaped like the tugra of Sultan Suleiman himself. "This," David said, voice grave, "was made by my master, Usta Yusuf. He crafted it in the year of the great procession, when the Sultan rode with 7,000 soldiers into Edorn." Allah reached out, but David gently stopped him. "Only look, not yet touch." He understood. It was like a holy relic. Years passed. Hallow's hands grew calloused, his arms stronger, and his cuts surer. He began to recognize the subtle moods of leather, which hides yielded best to embossing, which threads would hold under strain, which oils lent shine without darkening the tone. He learned to stitch under tension, to rivet without splitting, and to burnish edges until they gleamed like satin. One spring morning, a royal messenger arrived on horseback, bearing a sealed order. The Sultan requires 6 sets of imperial harnesses for the cavalry of the 4th Regiment. The man announced its delivery within 30 days. David's brows rose. 30 days. It's possible. Then choose another trade. The messenger scoffed. The palace pays well, but it does not. Wait. David turned to Hela. We begin tonight. They worked by lantern light in shifts that stretched into the early hours. Hela handled the cutting and dyeing. David did the stitching and silver inlay. The workshop became a shrine of labor, the air thick with the smell of beeswax, vinegar, and molten tin. They barely spoke, communicating with nods and gestures, their movements smooth as ritual. By the 27th day, the last rein was embossed, the final breast collar polished. Each set was wrapped in silk and boxed in cedar. The emblem of the imperial arsenal burned into the lid. When the cart arrived to collect them, the overseer inspected each piece, his fingers tracing the curves and edges. "Exquisite," he muttered. "These will ride with honor." As the cart disappeared into the city's maze, David sat back with a sigh. Khalil poured him a cup of sweet black tea. "We've done well, Usta." David nodded. "You've done well, Halal. Soon the shop will be yours." But before that could happen, trouble stirred. One afternoon, a younger saddler from a nearby workshop stormed in. They've started importing French tack. He spat. "Cheaper, machine-stitched. They say even the Janissaries will be using them." David stiffened. Spirit machines cannot stitch spirit into leather, but merchants don't care for spirit. Coin. Sure enough, within months, orders dwindled. Halal watched as neighboring workshops closed, replaced by tailors or tobacco sellers. A few masters tried to adapt to using cheaper dyes, simpler designs, but David refused. "If we surrender our craft, we surrender our soul," he told Halal. Then one day, while hammering a silver buckle, David collapsed. His heart had grown tired after decades of labor. Halal rushed him to the mosque's infirmary, but the healer only shook his head. David passed away that evening, surrounded by tools and unfinished harnesses. Grief sat heavy in the workshop. Customers trickled in with condolences. Many expected Halal to close the shop. He didn't stay. He lit the brazier the next morning, swept the stones, and placed David's favorite knife in the center of the workbench. Then he unwrapped the old master's green bundle. The ceremonial harness gleamed like a promise. Months passed. Law began teaching boys from the neighborhood, sharing what David had given him, experimented blending traditional designs with subtle modern touches. He learned which foreign leathers mimicked Anatolian ones, which threads could be dyed with native walnut ink. Though some laughed, others returned. A cavalry captain commissioned a set, then a vizier's son. Eventually, even a French ambassador requested a ceremonial bridle as a gift for Napoleon's stables. Halal had done what few could, preserve the soul while embracing the future. On the 10th anniversary of David's passing, Halal placed the finished ceremonial harness, once his grandfather's treasure, in a glass display at the entrance of the shop. Beneath it, on a brass plaque, he engraved a single line in Ottoman Turkish, for those who shape leather as others shape poetry. And every morning, as the dawn call sounded across the old city and the smell of cedar filled the air once again, the shop would stir to life. The hammer would ring, the knife would glide, and the leather rained, still soft, still strong, would whisper stories of empire, craft, and legacy. In the dim, pre-dawn hush of Topkapi Palace, where marble corridors echoed with distant footfalls and the scent of burning oil lamps clung to the walls, the janissary stalls slumbered in silence. Rows of dark wooden compartments lined the courtyard. Beneath the sweeping colonnade stall, a private world where one of the Sultan's elite guards had stabled his arms, rested his body, and whispered his thoughts into the shadows. It was in this veiled world, behind the outer brilliance of Ottoman gold and silk, that 17-year-old Adam moved like smoke through the cold morning air. He wore the muted robes of a palace errand boy, though his feet knew the layout of the janissary quarters like a second skin. The clang of the city far below had not yet begun. The morning call to prayer was still minutes away. This hour belonged to the ghosts of loyalty, ambition, and betrayal. Adam wasn't born for war, nor for palace service. He was the son of a Bulgarian candlemaker, seized during the Dev Sherm, the blood tax. Like hundreds before him, he had been marched from his village, converted, renamed, molded into a silent cog in the mighty Ottoman machine. Adam had something the others didn't, a mind trained not just in discipline and obedience, but in listening, to silence, to secrets, to shadows. He crept between the stalls, brass tray balanced in his hands with the janissary's morning tea steaming, black infusion brewed with cardamom and cinnamon. The cups would be cold before most of the soldiers rose, but it was tradition. Everything in the palace was tradition, ritual, repetition. It was how power endured. The stalls were not mere quarters. They were chambers of allegiance. Etchings in the wooden beams marked each janissary's present states, prayers, the names of fallen brothers. Adam often paused at stall 17, where an elder janissary named Halal Uga resided. Allah had seen 3 sultans rise and fall, and though his body was failing, his eyes missed nothing. Today, stall 17's curtain was drawn back. A flicker of movement within. Adam, came the old man's voice, low and rough like gravel. Yes, Aga, Adam replied, setting the tray on the stone bench outside. Come, Halal beckoned. Adam stepped in. The stall smelled of musk and leather. A falcon feather, long and white, rested on a stand beside Halal's scabbard. I heard them again last night, the elder whispered. Adam blinked. Who? The shadows. Adam didn't speak. He knew better. They come after the second call to prayer. 3 men, whispering behind the stalls. Planning. Planning what? Halal's eyes narrowed. Something against the Sultan, or his heir, or the vizier. Who can say? But treachery festers in the dark. Adam's heart ticked faster. It wasn't the first time Halal spoke of shadows. But this time, his tone was different, less dreamy, more certain. Tell no one. Watch. Listen. And if I vanish, go to the coffee cellar by the iron gate. Ask for the black fig. He will know. Adam swallowed hard and nodded. The elder leaned back into his furs, breath rattling. Outside, the azan began to echo across Istanbul's skyline. That night, Adam returned to the stalls long after the janissaries had eaten and retired. The moonlight poured through the arched openings above the courtyard, painting everything in silver. He crouched behind stall 19, cloaked in shadows. He waited, and then, his footsteps soft, deliberate. 3 figures in janissary garb moved like wolves. Voices hushed. He's too loyal to the old line, one said. The Sultan grows weak, said another. If the heir ascends, we lose our place. The vizier knows this. We strike before the end of the month. during the Lantern Festival. Their footsteps faded into the night, their faces never revealed, but their intent unmistakable. Adam's breath caught. Treason, a plot inside the very veins of the palace. But who would believe an errant boy? Over the following days, Adam noticed strange things. The stall of a janissary named Furhat Bey once, meticulous and gleaming now, bore a hidden pouch of foreign coins. Stall 8 smelled faintly of ink and wax seals. And in stall 12, he found a pair of boots with the soles slit open to hide messages. Someone was using the stalls as their silent headquarters. He remembered Halo's instructions. So that evening, under the veil of dusk, Adam slipped through the servant corridors to the iron gate and approached the old coffee vendor. "A cup with black fig," he said. The man's eyes narrowed. "Come back after dusk prayer." When Adam returned, the vendor handed him a cup, then slipped a folded note beneath the saucer. "Speak to no one. Report tomorrow night, same place." It was the beginning of a quiet war. Each night, Adam observed. He memorized the whispers, the gestures, the exchanges. He marked where the plotters paused, which stalls they leaned against. The stalls weren't just storage, they were messages themselves. One had a black tassel on its curtain, K. Another had 3 copper coins nailed to its beam, all signs in a secret language. One evening, Halal Uga was gone. No one spoke of it. His stall had been swept clean, as if he had never existed. Adam felt a cold pit grow in his belly. The old man had been right-hand. Now he had vanished, just as he had warned. But his warning remained. So Adam acted. The Festival of Lanterns brought light and laughter to the palace. Silk lanterns floated on the Bosphorus. Music filled the gardens, and the Sultan's pavilion blazed with opulence. Beneath the surface, a coup trembled, waiting to break free. That night, Adam passed the final message to the coffee vendor. The conspirators would meet at stall 12 during the midnight fireworks. The response came swift. "They will be caught. You must disappear. Go now." But Adam couldn't leave. He needed to see the end. So, hidden beneath a pile of saddlecloths, he waited once more, and when the first firework shattered the sky, Akenna, 3 janissaries entered the stall masked, armed, ready. But they were not alone. From behind the pillars, black-robed palace guards poured in, surrounding them. As steel clanged, yells rose. The traitors fought hard, but were outnumbered. In the chaos, Adam slipped away, heart pounding. By dawn, the stalls stood eerily quiet again. Its conspirators were gone, taken to the oubliettes beneath the seraglio. Their names would never be spoken again in Halaga's stall. A single falcon feather now lay in the doorway, tied with a red thread. A symbol, perhaps, or a farewell. Adam never returned to the stalls. The coffee vendor was gone, replaced by a younger man who claimed to know nothing of figs or codes. Adam was reassigned this time to the Sultan's library, where he served tea to scholars and viziers. But in his heart, he carried the whispers of that shadowy world, the stalls where loyalties bent like reeds, where silence was deadlier than steel, and where a boy's quiet listening changed the fate of an empire. And every now and then, when passing the northern wing of the palace, Adam would glance at the old colonnade and wonder how many secrets still whispered in the shadows of the janissary stalls. In the gray stillness before dawn, when the palace towers stood dark against the paling sky and only the faintest bird calls dared break the silence, the stables beneath the royal grounds were already alive with quiet labor. The world above, velvet curtains, gold-threaded garments, and silver breakfast trays still slumbered. But below, in the long shadow of power and luxury, a different sort of rhythm beat, the steady, practiced motions of the stable hands beginning their day. Beneath the palace lay a world of hoofbeats and hay, sweat and saddle grease, and at the heart of it moved a boy named Edric, 14 years old, wiry from work, his fingers calloused, and his eyes always half aware watching, not just the horses, but the moods of men. Edric had lived in the servant quarters since he was 8, taken in after his father, a groom himself, died, when a startled mare reared and crushed him against the wall. The older men didn't say much about it, only warned Edric never to move too quickly behind a skittish horse, never to raise his voice, and always to read the whites of their eyes. Horses, they said, told the truth faster than people ever would. Each morning began the same. Before the cock crowed, Edric slipped from his narrow cot, pulled on his rough spun tunic and boots, and made his way down the sloped tunnel that led from the outer kitchens to the stable yard. The corridor, damp and cold, smelled of earth and ash, but he moved through it like a fish through water. This was his world, his place. Outside, the yard was lined with small lanterns flickering in the breeze. In the wide, timber-framed stable, more than 30 horses were housed: royal mares, hunting stallions, the king's prized chargers, and even a few ponies belonging to the young princes and princesses. Edric's first task was always the same: water and silence. He unlatched the heavy wooden buckets from their hooks and made his way to the well. Each bucketful had to be drawn by hand, and each had to be delivered to the individual troughs before the horses were let out or fed. As he pulled on the rope, the pulley creaked above him, sounding like some old wooden beast groaning in protest. One by one, the horses stirred. Hooves clopped on stone. Snorts clouded in the morning chill. Edric moved among them gently, murmuring soft, nonsense words, the way his father used to. "Easy there, Darrow. Steady, Cress. You're up early. Aye. After watering came the mucking." He hated this part most, but it was the foundation of stable life. Pitchfork in hand, he set to work, stripping the stalls of soiled straw, shoveling it into wheelbarrows, and spreading fresh bedding in its place. The older stable hands had once teased him, saying even the queen's feet walked on less gold than he shoveled daily. At the time, he hadn't understood it was a joke about manure. It was back-breaking work. It's the kind that left your shirt damp and your back aching before the sun even crested the walls. But Edric had learned something over the years. In the stables, there were no masks, no faked politeness like the footmen wore upstairs, no poisoned smiles like those exchanged in the great halls. Here, what mattered was whether you could lift, carry, clean, and calm. Whether you knew the difference between a hungry whinny and a distressed one. Whether you had grit by the time the bell tower tolled 6 times, still too early for the nobility. The stable was halfway done. The horses had been fed oats, apples, and slices of beetroot for the royal stock. Edric had just begun brushing down a tall gray stallion named Halbert when he heard footsteps behind him. Quick, clipped, deliberate. That was Marta, the stable master's daughter. It's older than Edric by 3 years. She walked like someone who'd grown up around animals and wasn't scared of anything, least of all boys. Her sleeves were rolled, her apron stained, and her braided hair pinned tight beneath a wool cap. "Morning," she said, barely glancing at him. "Morning," Edric mumbled, focusing on Halbert's flank. "You missed Prince Tarian's pony," she said, gesturing toward the last stall. Edric turned red. "Okay, I'll get to him now. Do it before the little beast starts screaming. You know how the prince gets when Niblet's not ready for riding." Edric nodded. Kieran was the king's youngest son, 6 years old, and already famous for his tantrums. His favorite pony, Niblet, was just as spoiled by the time Edric reached the stall. Niblet had begun to paw at the floor and toss his head. All right, Edric murmured, grabbing a brush. "Let's get you handsome, little lord." P worked quickly but gently, cleaning the pony's hooves and smoothing his coat to a satin shine. The little animal nuzzled Edric's side, recognizing the familiar scent and steady hand. It was just after 7 when the stable doors opened wide. The royal riders began arriving, some for morning hunts, some for exercise, and some just to parade about the grounds. Footmen and guards moved like clockwork, their polished boots clacking on the stones, their voices sharp and clipped. One of the knights, Sir Ulrich, strode in, barking orders for his mount. A lady-in-waiting appeared soon after, asking for a gentle mare to ride alongside the Queen's procession. Edric didn't speak unless spoken to. He simply moved, assisted, held reins, fetched saddles, invisible but essential. He had just returned from delivering halberd to the upper courtyard when he spotted something odd, a black velvet glove lying in the straw beside the stable gate. It was not a thing one usually found in the muck and dust of a servant's place. Carefully, Edric picked it up. It was slim, clearly made for a woman's hand, and stitched with tiny pearls around the wrist. "Whose is that?" Marta asked, eyeing the glove from across the barn. "Dunno," Edric replied, turning it over. "Looks too fine to be lost down here." She raised a brow. "You think someone came slumming through the stables?" He didn't answer. Something about the glove unsettled him. It didn't belong, not just physically, but in mood, like a song out of tune. Edric had spent enough time around nobles to know that a lady losing her glove wasn't just a mistake. It was a statement, or a clue. He tucked it inside his tunic and said nothing. As the morning wore on, the stable began to quiet again. Riders departed. Hooves clattered away. The sun climbed high, warming the stone walls and the backs of tired workers. Edric paused by the doorway, wiping sweat from his brow, his shirt clinging to him. He looked up toward the high palace windows, now sparkling in the light. From here, the upper world looked peaceful, serene even. But he knew better. Up there, life was a performance. Down here, it was the rehearsal that made the show possible. He thought of the glove tucked against his chest, soft and strange. Maybe he'd bring it to Marta later, or maybe he'd leave it where someone would find it and draw their own conclusions. But for now, his world was one of hay hooves and heat, of leather straps and silent mornings, of knowing when to speak and when to stay still, being beneath the palace but never beneath notice, because even here, even in the stables, someone was always watching, and Edric, he was always listening. The first breath of dawn stretched its golden fingers across the minarets of the palace, brushing the domes with hues of amber and rose. Istanbul had not yet stirred. The air hung still and cool, wrapped in a blanket of pre-dawn mist. But beneath, the grand palace underneath its mosaic-tiled courtyards and towering arches, life had already begun to move. Beneath the stables of the Sultan's palace, a world hummed quietly into motion. Here, in the shadowy underbelly of imperial glory, a different kind of discipline thrived, one of quiet footsteps, whispered commands, and the rustle of straw underfoot. A young stable hand named Mehmet, barely 16 winters old, was among the first to awaken. His sleeping mat was tucked in the corner of the servant quarters, surrounded by the scent of old hay and the faint musk of horse sweat. He had long become familiar with that scent. It clung to his tunic, buried itself in his palms, and lived beneath his fingernails. It was the smell of duty. He sat up, silently, listening. Somewhere above, the palace musicians would soon strike the first notes of the nefer, the ceremonial trumpet that greeted the rising sun. But down here, the signal to begin came in the form of a low whinny or the shuffle of hooves. Mehmet rose, tying his sash quickly. A brass lantern hung on a wooden peg by the stable door. He lit it, casting a warm glow on the rows of feeding stalls. 60 imperial horses slept or stirred in their place, ceremony or royal parade. The stables were no ordinary pens. Their floors were tiled in decorative terracotta, the walls etched with verses from the Quran, and the air perfumed faintly with rosewater to soothe the prized beasts, hadi, baklim, Mehmet whispered, a phrase of encouragement, as much for himself as for the horses. His first task was to check on Zarafood, a tall, dapple-gray Arabian stallion known for his restless temperament. The Sultan had ridden him during the Feast of Sacrifice procession, and ever since, Zarafush's name had been spoken with reverence in both palace and city. Mehmet approached carefully, speaking in soft tones. He unbolted the stall, allowing just enough room to step in and gently stroke the horse's neck. Good boy. Let's see how you fared the night. With quiet movements, he checked the stallion's legs, hooves, and belly. No swelling, no signs of colic. A good sign. He fetched a curry comb and began grooming him with rhythmic patience. The stallion grunted approvingly, shifting weight from one leg to another as Mehmet worked. Soon, the stable came alive with more footsteps. Ali Usta, the senior groom, arrived with his grizzled beard and a pail of dates for the morning ration. Behind him, apprentices fetched buckets of fresh water drawn from the palace well. Careful not to spill even a drop. Mehmet, you're early again, Ali said, his voice like gravel underfoot. I wanted to see to Zarafouz before the others. Woke, Mehmet replied. Ali nodded. You're learning. By now, the entire stable complex echoed with a rustle of activity. Straw was replaced in the stalls, fresh hay forked into the feeding bins. Horses were brushed, hoofs picked, and tack inspected. Each bridle was rubbed with olive oil. Every saddle checked for wear. Even the smallest tear in a strap could cause injury to the Sultan's finest animals. And that could mean lashes for a careless hand. Once the grooming was done, it was time for the morning walk. Each horse was led out and turned to the training ring under the supervision of the head trainer, Ajir Aga. He was a massive man, his back bent like a bow from years of work, and his eyes sharp as a hawk's. No one dared slack under his gaze. Mehmet led Zarafushin around the ring at a trot, then a canter. Dust kicked up under the hooves, catching the morning light that now filtered down from above. The mist had cleared, revealing the domes and towers of the palace like a dream slowly solidifying after training. The horses were cooled with wet cloths, their muscles massaged with warm oil. Those chosen for imperial duty that day were separated and given a richer mash of oats, figs, and molasses. But the work did not end with the animals. The equipment room called the now benthambust with metalwork. Farriers reheated iron shoes, hammering them into shape over open flame. A scent of burning hoof trimmings mixed with the smoke, rising like incense. Mehmet was not yet trusted with the forge, but he watched closely, fascinated by the sparks and hiss of steam as the hot metal met cool water. Then came the cleaning of the golden harnesses, used only during state processions. These were not merely tools of control, but symbols of the Sultan's magnificence. Each buckle and stud gleamed with polished brass, some adorned with sapphires or tiny crescents inlaid with a mother dash of pearl. Mehmet sat cross-legged with the soft cloth, polishing a bridle so carefully it reflected his own weary face back at him. His fingers ached, but his heart felt proud. He was part of something greater, something that connected him to the empire's heartbeat. At mid-morning, the royal horse physician, an older man named Dr. Eskandar, made his rounds. With a trained eye and precise fingers, he examined teeth, checked pulses, and scribbled notes on parchment. Mehmet followed closely behind, handing over tools or holding the horses steady. Zarafushin's gait is improved, the doctor murmured. You've done well, Mehmet. It was only a passing comment, but it sent warmth through Mehmet's chest that lasted the rest of the day. As the sun climbed higher, so did the sounds above. The palace musicians played for the Sultan's breakfast. Market vendors called out from the palace walls. Dignitaries arrived on foot or in carriages, and the scent of roasting lamb and spices drifted on the breeze. But below, The cool stable halls, the world remained constant. By noon, most tasks were complete. The horses dozed in their stalls, tails swatting lazily. Mehmet helped Aliusta organize the feed sacks, then slipped away to wash at the marble basin near the back. His face was smudged, his sleeves stained, but his eyes were bright. Before he left, he returned to Zarafusin's stall. The stallion lifted his head, ears twitching. "Maybe one day I'll ride you," Mehmet whispered, offering a final pat. Not as a stable boy, but as a soldier, maybe even a janissary. The idea was laughable. He had no family name, no training, but dreams had a way of clinging to the edges of reality. Like straw to a tunic. Outside, the muezzin called the faithful to prayer. Mehmet paused at the threshold of the stables, taking in the sound. He looked back one last time. The scent of sweat, hay, and leather lingered in the air. Another morning had passed beneath the palace stables, quiet, unseen, but vital, and tomorrow it would begin again. The first call to prayer had not yet echoed through the minarets of Istanbul when Yunus crept silently through the stone corridors of the palace. The lantern in his hand flickered, casting long, uncertain shadows against the carved walls outside. The sky was still a bruised indigo, caught between night and dawn. The palace slept, but the stables stirred. Yunus was only 15. A stable boy among many, yet he knew his role bore a sacred weight. These were no ordinary horses. They belonged to the Sultan himself, beasts of magnificent stature, their hooves polished like marble, their manes brushed with fine oils, their bridles inlaid with gold thread. War horses and ceremonial mares, stallions gifted by foreign rulers, and steeds whose ancestors had carried sultans into battle. Each stood in a stall grander than most homes in the city. His boots crunched softly on the gravel path that led to the stables behind the palace gardens. The air was sharp and cold, the dew clinging to the herbs and jasmine bushes that lined the path. Somewhere in the distance, a caged nightingale began to sing a prelude to the morning that was fast approaching. Yunus reached the heavy wooden doors and pushed them open with both hands. Inside, a chorus of soft snorts, the rustle of straw, and the quiet stamping of hooves welcomed him. The scent was powerful leather, hay, animal musk, and the faint lingering smoke from the torches kept burning low through the night. He took a moment, as he always did, to offer a silent greeting to the horses. Salem and Alakam, Bayo's ruler. He whispered, "Peace be upon you, white souls." The stables were lined in long rows, each stall separated by polished wood partitions and brass fittings. Carved plaques above each door bore the names of the horses: Altan Gauze, Golden Shadow; Fertina, Yalisi; Storm Mane, ZMRT, Ayak, Emerald Hoof, and others, each more poetic than the last. Yunus set down his lantern and got to work. The morning feeding was a ritual of great precision. Each horse had a different diet. Some were fed a mixture of barley and chickpeas soaked overnight. Others were given figs, dried apricots, or even crushed almonds mixed with honey water to keep their coats glossy. A few of the oldest stallions received a dash of saffron in their feeds, said to preserve their vitality. In the far stall, Ayaz, Cardinal White Eagle, the Sultan's favorite Arabian steed, tossed his head impatiently. "Yes, I know. You're always first," Yunus muttered with a smile, lifting the bucket he had prepared just for him. He stepped inside the stall without hesitation. The great horse, a creature of dazzling white, with eyes like polished obsidian, bowed his head slightly, allowing Yunus to stroke his mane. "Easy, Dostum. You'll have your breakfast," he said. He poured the grain into the trough and watched as the stallion began to eat, nostrils flaring, his muscles rippling beneath his hide. The boy moved swiftly down the row, stopping at each stall, whispering, the horse's name like a prayer, delivering the feed with care and a sense of ceremony. He swept up the old hay, replaced it with fresh straw, refilled the water buckets with cool spring water drawn from the palace fountain. By the time the last horse was fed, the sky had begun to lighten. Pale gold streaked across the horizon beyond the domes and towers of the palace. The muezzin's voice, solemn and echoing, began the first call to prayer, rippling across the city in waves. The horses, as if recognizing the sacred hour, fell quiet. Yunus wiped the sweat from his brow. Though the work was hard, he found joy in it. These horses were not just animals. They were companions of power, guardians of tradition. In their eyes shimmered the glory of the Ottoman court. An old man entered the stables, then Master Ferhat, the chief keeper of the Sultan's horses. His beard was silver, his gaze sharp despite his years. He had served 2 sultans before the current one and had once been a cavalryman in the elite Sipahi corps. Up early, as always, he grunted, nodding approvingly. The horses were restless, Yunus replied. They felt the dawn coming. Ferhat chuckled. They always do. Better than any clock in the palace. He ran a hand along Altengouge's flank and inspected the trough. Good. Not too much barley. You're learning. I measured it. By eye. That's how a true stableman does it, Ferhat said, and for a moment a rare smile cracked across his weathered face. Come, we must prepare Bayaz Cartel. The Sultan rides this morning. Yunus straightened. He had never before been allowed to assist in saddling the Sultan's mount. Truly, Effendi. Ferhat nodded. You've earned it. Together, they entered the stall. Yunus handed Ferhat the ornate saddle, its leather dyed red and black-edged, with silk cord and stitched in delicate tulip motifs. He watched every movement as Ferhat strapped it onto the stallion's back, checked the girth, adjusted the stirrups. Then Yunus was handed the bridle-its bit silver, reins braided from horsehair, and silk, the tassel bearing the Sultan's seal. Be gentle, Ferhat instructed. He trusts you. Yunus reached up, careful and reverent. The stallion lowered his head, just enough for the bit to slide in. When the bridle was secured, Ferhat patted Yunus's shoulder. You'll make a fine keeper one day, he said, as the morning sun broke over the Bosphorus. Its rays pierced through the stable windows. Dust danced in golden shafts of light. Outside, a palace guard approached, his caftan bearing the crescent moon insignia. The Sultan approaches the guard, announced. Yunus stepped back, hands behind his back, heart pounding. This would be the closest he had ever been to the Padishah. Moments later, Sultan Murad IV appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a simple riding cloak of deep green, he walked without entourage. His face, framed by a neatly trimmed beard, bore a stern majesty. Yet his eyes softened at the sight of Bayaz Qua. The horse neighed softly and stepped forward. Ready, my friend? The Sultan said, patting the stallion's neck. Ferhat bowed deeply. He is my sovereign. Yunus followed suit, head lowered, afraid to even breathe too loudly. The Sultan mounted with practiced ease and turned to Ferhat, who prepared him today. He asked. Ferhat smiled slightly. The boy, Sultanum, Yunus. The Sultan looked down at the young stable boy. How old are you? 15, Your Majesty, Yunus replied, barely above a whisper. The Sultan studied him for a moment. You serve with care. The horses know it. He pulled gently on the reins and urged Bayaz Cartel forward, as the hooves clopped away, echoing. Against the stone, Yunus stood frozen, a mixture of pride and awe swelling in his chest. When the Sultan disappeared into the morning light, Ferhat turned to him. You'll tell your children of this day. Yunus smiled, his fingers still tingling from the reins of the Sultan's horse. I will tell my grandchildren, he whispered. The sun rose fully then, casting its golden crown over the domes and turrets of the palace. The stables returned. Too quiet, but something had changed. Yunus was no longer just a stable boy. He had stepped, however briefly, into the realm of King Stat, and in the eyes of the Sultan's horse, he had been found worthy. The night in Istanbul had not yet surrendered to dawn, but the silence that blanketed the palace grounds was already breaking. It's fractured by muffled footsteps and the rustling of straw. Deep beneath the eastern wing of Topkapi Palace, where few outsiders ever ventured, lay the Janissary styles of place, half stable, half sanctum. Here, the prized war horses of the Sultan's elite guards rested, fed, trained, and waited. But they were not alone in that shadowy realm of muscle and leather, iron and incense. It was said, the walls whispered. Mehmet, just 14, did not believe in whispers when he was first brought to the stalls. He had arrived 2 years earlier from Adorn, a blacksmith's son conscripted into service not as a soldier, but as a stable apprentice. He quickly learned that the world of the Janissaries was wrapped in secrets, rituals, and quiet power. And here, in the subterranean corridors, lined with wood smoke lanterns and heavy gates, those secrets breathed through the cracks. Each morning, long before the muezzin's call, Mehmet would rise from the servants' barracks and make his way to the stalls. The stone beneath his feet remained cold, no matter the season. Carrying a copper lantern, he descended the spiral stair into the belly of the palace. That was when he first began to hear the sounds that were not quite human, nor entirely animal. Soft huffs in the dark, the occasional scrape of unseen hooves, or the creak of wood under shifting weight. But worse than those were the whispers. They began faintly, as if 2 old men were speaking just around the corner, murmuring secrets in a language Mehmet could not understand. At first, he thought it was just the wind through the narrow corridors, or the voices of other apprentices playing tricks, but no one else heard them. Stay quiet, his mentor, Yusuf, had once warned him. The stalls are older than the walls above. Ain't older things sometimes remain. Mehmet had nodded and said nothing more. His tasks were simple, repetitive, yet precise. Each Janissary horse had a name carved above its stall. Korkmaz, Atilgan, Yildirim, Kara. Horses bred for battle, each chosen by the Sultan's hand-picked riders. They were large, dark, and unlike the village animals Mehmet had known. These horses did not neigh or bray like beasts. They stood with eerie composure, their eyes heavy with something ancient. This morning was colder than most. A fog clung to the floor like spilled milk, and Mehmet could feel it soak through his slippers. As he approached Korkmaz's stall, he paused. Something was wrong. The lanterns in this section, always lit by the night keeper, were dark. A shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from something deeper, more instinctual. He hesitated. Yusuf Effendi, he called into the dark, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. No reply. Taking a breath, he moved forward. The silence was complete. No rustling hay, no shifting hooves. Just silence, as if the horses themselves were listening. Suddenly, a whisper. It came from behind the stall, low and urgent. He turned, holding up his lantern. Nothing. Another whisper. Psst. This time from the corridor to his left. Who's there? He asked, but even his own voice sounded swallowed by the place. The light from his lantern flickered as if disturbed by breath. Then a shadow moved. Not a person, not quite. Slender, gliding along the stone as if cloaked in wind. It vanished into the stall of Kara, the Sultan's most temperamental stallion, heart racing. Mehmet approached the stall and peered in. The horse stood still, calm, taut to calm. No snort, no ear twitch, no recognition of his presence. And then he saw hoofprints in the straw butt, not of horses. Longer, almost clawed. He ran later that morning. Yusuf found Mehmet in the washing trough, shivering, but uninjured. The old stable. Master said nothing as he pulled the boy out, wrapped him in a wool cloak, and handed him warm goat's milk. I saw it, Mehmet whispered. Why, USUF? Didn't ask what. He simply nodded and said, some things are seen only by those who are meant to stay. The phrase puzzled Mehmet for days, but that week, the whispers grew louder. Now he could almost make out words ancient, Turkish perhaps, or Greek maybe. Older, he began to recognize patterns in the sounds, a certain tone when a janissary returned from battle, a particular cadence when a horse fell ill. The shadows weren't just random, they followed ritual, and so did the janissaries. One night, hidden in the rafters, Mehmet watched as 3 of the Sultan's personal guards entered the stalls, not to feed or train, but to kneel. Before Kara's stall, they laid down something wrapped in silkwet, looked like a braid of hair and a small silver coin. They chanted, and Kara bowed his head as if in prayer. After they left, the whispers surged. Not frightening, but sad. The next morning, Kara was dead. No wound, no sign of struggle, just lying there, eyes open as if staring at something Mehmet could not see. Months passed. Mehmet grew stronger, more capable, and more silent. He began walking barefoot through the halls. At night, trying to understand the patterns. He sketched the hoofprints in the straw, traced the worn carvings on the walls, collected small items left by janissaries, bundles of rosemary, bits of iron, talismans. Eventually, he found the hidden door. It was in the stall of a tilgin behind a feeding trough, half buried in dust and old stone. A small crescent was carved on the handle. When Mehmet opened it, he found a spiral stair that led deeper than the stalls below the palace waterlines, past the Roman ruins, into a crypt older than the Ottomans. Here, the walls were etched with murals, horses with wings, warriors with no faces, and stall doors that opened into stars. In the center, a single torch burned eternal, untouched, and beneath it, a saddle of black leather, covered in dust and feathers. Mehmet knelt before it, unsure why. The room felt alive not in body, but in memory, as if thousands had come before him, each offering silence and service. He did not speak. He simply stood, and in that moment, he felt the whisper not in his ears, but in his chest. Guard the breath of war. Years later, Mehmet became the youngest keeper of the janissary stalls in living memory. Never fought in battle, never wore a sword, but every soldier who returned from war came first to him to whisper something into the ears of their steeds before leading them out, and in the dark, Mehmet would listen. He was their secret keeper, their stable ghost, their silent priest. And when visitors asked why the janissary horses were so calm, so obedient, so unshakable in battle, he would smile and say, "They remember everything." At night, he would walk among the stalls with no lantern. The horses would nod as he passed, their eyes glinting with knowledge not learned, but inherited. He knew the shadows now. They were not monsters. They were memories, still whispering, and Mehmet, the boy from Adorn, had become their voice. In the heart of the Topkapi Palace complex, past the imperial kitchens and beyond the tiled courtyards, echoing with soft footsteps of servants and scribes, lay a secluded enclave, the janissary stalls, low and long, with worn wooden beams and iron-latticed windows. These stables were unlike any other in the empire. Here, the horses of the Sultan's elite guards, the janissaries, were kept in a hush of discipline and devotion. And within this quiet, each hoofbeat and rustle carried a story, one of loyalty, sacrifice, and unseen secrets that hung like mist in the pre-dawn air. It was before sunrise when Mehmet, stable boy of just 16 winters, arrived at the stalls. Wrapped in a coarse woolen cloak, his lantern swayed with each hurried step. The scent of leather, straw, and sweat enveloped him, comforting in its familiarity. His job was not merely to feed or brush the horses. He listened to the whispering shadows, the janissaries themselves, towering figures in crimson robes and tall white headdresses were rarely seen during the day. Their appearances were fleeting, mounting a horse, inspecting their weapons, or murmuring orders before vanishing into the palace depths or the city beyond. Yet, even in their absence, their presence lingered. The very walls of the stalls seemed to hum with memories of drills, conquests, and whispered conversations. Mehmet had learned early to be invisible. The guards preferred silence, and so did the horses. And it was in that silence that he began to notice things: a dropped token with the seal of a foreign prince, a bloodied cloth tucked beneath the saddle, a blade left out too long after dusk. He said nothing, of course. What was a stable boy's word against the Empire's elite? But still, he remembered, that particular morning, the shadows felt heavier. He entered stall 9, home to Azar, a spirited black stallion, known for his untamed strength. Only Janissary Captain Salem rode him, and none dared attempt otherwise. Mehmet approached carefully, whispering soft words as he held out the grain. Azar snorted, pawed the ground, and backed away. His ears twitched, not from Mehmet, but something beyond, something Mehmet couldn't yet see. "It's easy," Mehmet whispered. "It's just me, boy." But even as he spoke, he felt a shift in the air, as if the shadows themselves were listening. Later that morning, the palace buzzed with activity. An envoy from Venice had arrived, bearing silks, wine, and a message meant only for the Sultan's ears. Janissaries flanked the delegation, their faces unreadable, their boots pounding the stone like war drums. Mehmet stood aside as they passed, gripping the halter of a nervous mare. Among the guards was Captain Salem, tall, stoic, and terrifyingly precise. His eyes, dark and sharp, passed over Mehmet for a heartbeat too long. Not with recognition, but calculation. That night, long after the horses had been watered and fed, and the other stable hands had gone to their quarters, Mehmet remained. The moonlight poured through the slats, casting silver ribbons across the ground. He walked slowly between the stalls, his lantern dimmed, heart beating a bit too fast. Something was wrong. He could feel it, hear it. Then he saw it, a figure in the shadows, crouched by the far stall. Not moving like a worker or a soldier, but slow, deliberate. The flicker of a hidden blade caught the light. Mehmet's breath hitched. He stepped back instinctively, but a hoof clattered behind him, and the figure looked up. A masked man, eyes narrow and wild, sprinted toward him. Mehmet turned and ran. Through the narrow alleys between the stalls, past buckets and bales, he sprinted, lantern forgotten. Behind him, the stranger gave chase. A scream would bring the guards, but he dared not. What if this was part of something larger, something treasonous? He dove into stall for empty for the past week, since its mare had been transferred. Crouched behind a barrel, holding his breath. Footsteps, close at, then silence. A whisper broke it low and guttural in a language Mehmet didn't understand. Not Turkish, not Arabic, something older. The man moved past, and after several minutes, shadows swallowed him whole. The next day, nothing seemed different on the surface, but Mehmet noticed the tension. Janissaries spoke less. Their eyes darted to shadows. Captain Salem rode Azar twice, circling the outer palace as though expecting something, and the stable's quiet felt no longer like peace, but anticipation. Unable to keep it in, Mehmet approached Yasar Aga, the master of the stables. The old man, bent with age but sharp in mind, listened quietly as Mehmet recounted what he saw. Yasar said nothing at first. Then, with a sigh, he closed the stable door and motioned Mehmet to sit. "You are not the first to notice the shadows," he also murmured. "But you are the first to speak of them. He then told Mehmet of an old oath that among the Janissaries were those not just trained for war, but guardians of secrets, hidden threats to the Sultan, plots within the palace, foreign agents. All were handled in silence. No trials, no public floggings, only whispers. But what I saw, was he one of them? A traitor? Yasser only shook his head, or an agent of silence. It is not always clear. That night, Mehmet returned to stall 9. Azar stood still, watching him from beneath the straw. Mehmet pulled a small parchment, sealed with a wax insignia he had never seen before. Someone had left it there, not for the Sultan, not for a janissary, for someone in the stalls. He took it to Yasser. The old man looked pale. "This seal," he whispered, "belongs to the Circle of the Crescent, a group disbanded decades ago. Assassins trained by rogue janissaries. They were thought dead. Then why are they back?" "Because," Yasser said grimly, "power never dies. It just waits in the dark." That night, the stables were surrounded by guards, silent as shadows themselves. They waited. Mehmet, hiding behind a feed sack, watched as Captain Salem entered, in his hand the parchment, in the other his sword. The masked man returned, just as before, but this time the trap was set. Steel met steel. No words were exchanged, only the sound of blades clashing, horses stamping, and the hiss of breath. Mehmet didn't see the final blow, but he heard it, a wet final gasp by morning. The stables returned to silence. Captain Salem, bloodied but alive, emerged with the severed mask. No explanation was given. The guards vanished before sunrise. No one mentioned it again, but things changed. A new inscription was carved above the stalls, even in silence. "We stand watch." Mehmet stayed on, older now, wiser. The horses still neighed. The dust still rose, but he never forgot the night the shadows whispered too loud, and whenever he brushed Azar, who stood proud and eternal, Mehmet would whisper back, "I heard them, I listened." In the quiet corners of the Ottoman Empire's imperial stables, beneath the tiled domes and sandstone arches, there existed a world where silence reigned, not the silence of indifference, but one shaped by rhythm, patience, and practiced care. It was here, amid leather, twine, and old cloth, that the aging saddler Jacob Effendi passed his days, devoted to the gentle art of mending haynets and harness straps. The imperial stables in Istanbul were no ordinary workplace, home to the Sultan's prized horses, steeds bred for war ceremony. In parades, the stables echoed with the sound of hoofbeats and the quiet labor of grooms, farriers, and caretakers. But Jacob Effendi's workshop, set apart in a shaded annex, felt like another world entirely. A world of soft creaks from wooden spools, the fragrance of oiled leather, and the rhythmic pull of a needle through thick strap hide. Jacob had served 3 sultans in his lifetime, not as a soldier, nor courtier, but as a humble mender of things others thought broken. His tools were few: curved needles forged by hand in Damascus, beeswax blocks for thread, scissors dulled at the edges by time, and a wooden awl with an ivory handle gifted by a janissary long past. With these, he stitched not just broken haynets or torn girths, but the continuity of tradition itself. Each morning, as the sun rose over the domes and minarets of the city, Jacob would be there, seated, cross-legged on a faded cushion, sorting through a stack of leather straps and frayed rope nets delivered by the younger stable hands. These boys, barely in their teens, called him Deed or Usta, depending on whether they sought his wisdom or his scolding. He was both a grandfather and a master, wrapped in one weathered figure with eyes sharp as tacks. "You cannot rush a strap, child," he once said to young Murat, who had tried to fix a torn halter with a kitchen twine. "K-horse trusts its harness. as a soldier trusts his blade. One snap, and the trust is lost. Murat had nodded solemnly, watching as Jakob undid his messy knots and began again with calm fingers and a silent chant. An old rhyme from the steppes his father once whispered, while braiding rope. His every movement held a purpose. He wetted the leather just enough to soften it, oiled it gently with sesame oil, and worked the awl in careful rotations, never forcing the holes, but easing them open like coaxing secrets from a shy friend. His most treasured task was mending hay nets, woven from coarse rope and prone to fraying. Hay nets were humble yet essential. Without them, the horses would scatter their feed, trampling it into the mud. Each net bore the marks of its user a favorite knot, a widened loop, a tugged thread where a hungry mouth had worked too hard. And to Jakob, each tear was a story. This one, he said one day, holding up a net with fraying knots near the bottom, belongs to Ideen, the gray stallion. See how he bites the corner when he's impatient. He chuckled to himself, threading fresh rope with slow grace. He always gets his way. But not all mending was quiet work. One stormy morning, a guard burst into Jakob's workshop, cloak soaked, breath sharp. Sultan's ceremonial harness. He gasped. The gold-threaded oneette snapped at the buckle. We need it ready by afternoon for the procession. Jakob did not flinch. Wordlessly, he rose, took the harness from the man's hands, and unrolled it on his low workbench. The damage was subtle, yet dangerous. A weakened stitch in the chest strap, where weight bore down most fiercely during movement. He worked for hours, ignoring the thunder outside, his old fingers flying with an urgency that retained precision. He replaced the worn thread with doubled silk core sinew, reinforced the edges with a hidden braid, and burnished the surface until it gleamed. When the guard returned, Jakob held it out without a word. The man blinked. It looks new, Jakob said quietly. It looks ready. Despite the prestige of his role, Jakob never sought honor or elevation. He declined offers to train apprentices formally at court. Too much pride spoils the needle, he often said. Let those who truly want to learn come with questions, not resumes. Still, many came. Boys from villages, sons of soldiers, even the occasional janissary, too wounded for the battlefield. They'd sit at his feet and listen, and if they proved patient, not merely skilled, but reverent, he would teach them a stitch or two. That was his way. Mending was a sacred act. He believed every object deserved a second chance. Once, a stable boy was about to discard a chewed-through halter. It's no good anymore. The boy muttered. Yaku beheld the broken piece in his hands, turning it gently. It held for 5 years, fed and led horses in snow and sun. We don't cast aside loyal service, and so he mended it not to use again, but to hang above his workshop door as a reminder. Even broken things have dignity in the long afternoons. As sunlight filtered through lattice windows and birds chirped in the fig trees outside, Cobb would hum Ottoman lullabies while he worked. Sometimes he'd tell tales from his youth of a time when he was a stable hand himself, brushing horses and dreaming of battles. But a fall from a horse had ended that path, and instead his hands found meaning not in swords or reins, but in needles and knots. As the years wore on, fewer came to see him work. The empire was changing. Machines now braided rope faster than human fingers, and foreign imports replaced handmade leather. Still, Jakob endured, for there were always horses, and as long as they lived, they would need care, not just the rough utility of labor, but the subtle kindness of things repaired with love. One winter evening, the sky dark and snow beginning to fall, Jakob sat by the brazier, warming his fingers. A young man entered the workshop, tall, quiet, the look of a soldier. You mended my saddle once, the man said softly. Years ago, before I rode to Edern, I never thanked you. Cobb looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. If it carried you there and back, then we're even. The man placed a worn pouch on the Tabola gift of rare beeswax and silk cord for the next saddle. Jakob nodded, touched. He did not need thanks, but he cherished memory. Every strap he repaired, every net he reknotted, carried pieces of lives he'd never live, journeys he'd never take. And that, too, was enough when Jakob Effendi passed away, quietly in his sleep one spring dawn. The entire stables mourned. The horses stamped uneasily for days, sensing the absence. The boys lit a candle outside his door. In the headroom, once a boy who had tugged on Jakob's sleeve, asking how to tie a soldier's knot, placed the old halter above the entrance of the imperial tack room. A plaque was carved in old Turkish script and mounted beside it. In every thread, a memory. In every mend, a mercy. Used to Jacobi, who gave broken things new life. And still, to this day, when the wind brushes through the stables and rustles the leather straps and nets hanging from wooden beams, some say they can hear a soft humming, but lullaby of a man who believed that to mend was to love, and that even the humblest repair could honor the soul of a creature who bore the burdens of an empire. Thank you for resting here a while, for stepping into the quiet world of soot-darkened pots, morning fires, the quiet care of a cook who stirred more than just soup. If your eyes feel heavier now, it's only the calm weight of time wrapping gently around you. May your night be as steady and comforting as the rhythm of a spoon on iron, soft and unhurried. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to subscribe only if it feels right. And if you're still awake, feel free to whisper where you're listening from, or just say good night below. For now, sleep well and let the past keep you company a little longer.